Welcome to the Well Woman Show, where we interview women executives, leaders, and entrepreneurs.
And you're listening to the Well Woman Show,
where motivated women achieve fulfillment and well-being.
You're listening to the Well Woman Show.
Take time for myself by coming to things like Well Woman Drinks.
To be accepting of myself no matter what. Step away from judgment as much as possible.
You're listening to the Well Woman Show.
You're going to be in for a good ride. I don't regret anything. Everything I've ever done, I've learned from it, one way or another, good or bad.
Being a little bit selfish for yourself, put your own oxygen mask on first and then give what's left.
I'm a woman. I would prefer to tell my own story. My story, though it's very personal, is universal.
You're listening to the Well Woman Show. And now your host, Giovanna Rossi.
Hi, Giovanna Rossi here, and welcome to another episode of The Well Woman Show, where I interview women leaders, executives, and entrepreneurs about their lives and their road to becoming and being who they are today. Are you at the top of your game professionally but feeling burned out? Or finding it hard to focus on your goals? Or unfulfilled personally? Or are you in transition, simply juggling so many things you find it hard to take care of your own needs? Well, you're not alone. We all need to activate the 4 universal superpowers. These are the internal strengths and abilities we all already have but don't use all the time. Superpowers can be cultivated, and they include awareness, intuition, action, and acceptance. Toward the end of the show, in a segment called Superpowers for Success, I ask my guest about her superpowers, and the answers will give you the strength, perspective, and power to live a well woman life. I'm so happy you're here, so thanks for tuning in. This episode of the Well Woman Show is brought to you by Collective Action Strategies, supporting organizations that support women and families, and by Well Woman Life Movement Challenge Quiz, your resource for living your best life. If you're in burnout or major transition, this is your time to figure out what's holding you back from making the changes you need to make in order to live your fullest, most joyful life. The cause of all of our challenges, personal or professional, can actually be rooted in the lack of internal superpowers and or external supports. Our Well Woman Life framework tells you which stage of the Well Woman life cycle you're in and what to do about it so you can truly live your best life. You can find out more at wellwomanlife.com/quiz. I'm so thankful for support from Natural Awakenings magazine in New Mexico, a monthly green, healthy lifestyle publication, and for support from High Desert Yoga, promoting optimum physical health, clarity of mind, and spiritual inspiration for all. I'm speaking with Merve Emre on the program today. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
I want to get started. We heard in the introduction a little bit about your background and your bio, but Merve, I really want you to just start out by telling listeners, what are you working on and how does it impact women's lives and well-being?
So the most recent project that I finished is a book on personality testing. And it's a kind of history of the Myers-Briggs type indicator. Are you familiar with MBTI?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So for listeners who might not be familiar with it, it is the most popular personality inventory in the world. And it classifies people's personalities along 4 different dimensions, whether they're introverted or extroverted, thinkers or feelers, sensors or intuitors, and judgers or perceivers. And one of the really interesting things about MBTI that most people don't know is that it was actually invented by a mother and daughter team working in the 1940s and 50s on it. And their biographies have pretty much been entirely erased by the fact that the personality test is now mostly used in very male-dominated environments, like in corporations, in the military, and the clergy. So I just finished that project, and it was very much an act of feminist recovery, trying to bring to light the lives and the passions and the vocations of these women who had pretty much been lost to time. Oh. And one of the reasons it was also interesting for me was that, the 2 women who invented the test, Catherine Briggs and Isabel Briggs Myers, were housewives and they were mothers, and they used their observations of their children in order to design this personality test. So they were very interested in figuring out how to take parenting and transform it into a kind of professionalized occupation, one in which you could yield these really interesting psychological or sociological insights about how people behaved.
How interesting. And so what do you think about the fact that it was women that developed this? I mean, could men have developed something like this? And would it, when would that have happened? Like why then, and why these women?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll say why these women first. I mean, these were two utterly extraordinary women who were not content to just stay at home and raise their children. But they happened to be living at a time where it was very difficult for them to envision what else they could do. They were primarily responsible for taking care of their homes, taking care of their kids, taking care of their husbands. And while they were both college educated, there was absolutely no expectation that they would then go into the workforce or they would have a kind of fulfilling career independent of their homes. And I think that was really what motivated them to take the material that they had to work with, which were their families, and transform that into something beyond just the day-to-day routines of childcare. And why then, or why in the 1940s and 50s? I mean, one of the really interesting things that was happening then was that more and more women were entering the workforce, particularly after World War II. And it became really important to figure out, or for corporations at least, it became really important to figure out how to manage this rapidly expanding workforce. And one of the things that Catherine and Isabel saw was that the workplace was totally ripe for introducing a kind of standardized instrument that would tell you where to put workers. So if a person was an extroverted thinker, you could tell them that they might belong in this kind of job. Or if they were an intuitive judger, you might say, well, this might actually be better for you. So it was the kind of perfect coincidence of two women's extraordinary motivation and dedication with a very particular historical situation in the U.S. at the time.
Okay. And so what are you saying in your book about personality tests and how they're used?
I mean, I'm saying a couple of things. So on the one hand, it is, I'm arguing that, well, I'm asking why is it that people continue to be so drawn to these tests even after they have been all but debunked by science? So, very few people, I think, believe that these tests are scientifically rigorous. And there are a lot of problems with the categories that they offer us to think about our personalities. And yet I think we keep coming back to them with this fascination. They're incredibly seductive because they give us a language for talking about ourselves, and a language that is almost immediately understandable by other people. So when I asked you if you knew what Myers-Briggs was, you sort of immediately said yes. And if I told you that I was an extrovert, you'd also have a pretty good sense offhand for what that means. And you could make certain judgments about my personality just from that one word. And so I think it's incredibly popular because it does provide this sort of language of the self that circulates really easily and accessibly among very, very, very different kinds of people, among total strangers, in fact. So that's one thing that I'm sort of saying. And then that's just quickly, the other thing I'll say is that I, came to the project initially as a little bit of a skeptic. And then when my children were born, I felt my initial skepticism start to soften. And I don't know if you've had this experience, but I do feel like sometimes looking back at your children, you can just kind of see that certain traits were almost imprinted from day one. And I found that the language of type and of personality that I was critiquing in the book, I was actually starting to use that language to understand my children and how I related to my children. So part of the argument is that this is a language of the self that really flares at certain moments when we're looking for something sort of stable to hold on to describe people we might not otherwise really know, but we really want to know.
Yeah. So you seem to like the subject of motherhood, right? And so you've explored the two authors of Myers-Briggs as mothers. You've also just written an essay called Mothering Under Capitalism. Can you talk about why you wrote that?
Yeah, I mean, so the essay is a review of this new book by the British feminist and psychoanalyst Jacqueline Rose. And Rose is really interested in why it is that mothers are treated so badly. why they're treated so badly in employment situations, why the pain of mothers isn't fully appreciated or registered in hospitals, why the focus is so often on babies and baby-friendly policies and not on protecting the health and livelihood and emotional well-being of mothers. And at the same time, she argues, we also hold mothers to these impossible standards of love and goodness. We continue to expect mothers to devote themselves to their children. And I think we are intensely skeptical of unsentimental or cool mothers. And, many of us who are mothers have internalized these critiques and feel, guilty about not doing enough for our children or working and leaving our children at home with somebody else to care for them. And Rose does a really wonderful job, I think, bringing to light these questions that haunt mothers. But part of the argument I wanted to make in that essay is, I think the problem with motherhood, or how we talk about motherhood, is that we don't sufficiently acknowledge that motherhood is work, that it's labor. Being pregnant is work. Breastfeeding is work. Taking care of your children, cleaning your house. This is all work. And if you didn't do it, you would be paying somebody else to do it. But as mothers, that work is unwaged. And the expectation is that we do that work because we are biologically or naturally inclined to do that work. We do that work because we love the people that we care for. And I think one of the reasons it's easy to exploit mothers is because what they do is not viewed as being labor. It's just viewed as being a kind of biological imperative or an impulse. And I wanted to make that point in part to kind of resist the idea that the reason we treat mothers badly is simply because we are, Rose argues that we are afraid of mothers, that people are threatened by both the potential to create life, that people are threatened by the potential to create life. But I wanted to argue that there's a more sort of basic economic reason why it is that we as a society do not treat mothers well.
Okay. And so there's a sort of explicit treating mothers, poorly. And then there's a more subtle, and as you said, more internalized, even by mothers ourselves, treatment of mothers. So what do you think, where are we, as a society with that? And what are the next steps?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on where you are, right? So I actually live in Canada right now. And I'm moving to the UK, and it's really interesting because I had my older son in the US and I had my younger son in Canada. And there's just a really, really vast difference between what these different societies do to support mothers in a very material sense. So when I had my older son, I sort of had to rely on my employer to give me some maternity leave so that I could stay at home and recover from labor and delivery, and so that I could be with him. But here in Montreal, where I am, it is mandated by the provincial government that I have 20 weeks of maternity leave. So that, for instance, is a huge difference. And I think it's just really, really criminal that there is not any kind of federally mandated maternity leave policy in the United States. Similarly, one of the things that I have access to here in Montreal, and that I will continue to have access to in the UK, is a certain amount of government subsidized childcare, daycare. And that, again, is something that we really do not have in the United States, that I think makes it really, really difficult for women to take care of their children. Beyond that, I am just struck by the degree to which we as a society do tend to prioritize the well-being of babies over the well-being of mothers. And I think in the U.S. there is not nearly enough support provided for postpartum depression or postnatal depression. There aren't nearly enough resources for taking care of a newborn, and then later for helping parents educate and take care of their older children. And I think you can really trace this all the way from birth to those earliest days of childhood to the fact that affordable college education is no longer really an option in the United States. So it seems to me that there's a lot left to do for the state and for society to help mothers out.
And when you say mothering under capitalism, you're specifically talking about the U.S., the capitalism that we have in the U.S., where there really aren't that many social programs. There's no, paid maternity leave. There's no, free college education. Is that what you're talking about?
No, I mean, I am talking more generically, in the sense that nowhere really is the work that mothers do recognized at work. That's definitely true, I think. I think there's a particularly pernicious problem in the U.S. because the United States government doesn't offer the same kind of social programs that democratic socialist democracies in Canada and in Europe do. So I think the problem is especially visible or exacerbated there. But no, the problem of mothering under capitalism is a problem everywhere, just because the work that mothers do is not recognized as work at all.
And what, if anything, do you suggest needs to change? Like, what can people actually do and focus on in order to improve this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, in some ways, it is just endemic to a capitalist structure. I think there are things that people can sort of individually do in their own homes. But to me, the most kind of promising political program comes from the Italian feminist Silvia Federici, who in the 70s tried to organize a political movement around wages for housework, where women actually demanded wages to do housework, not because they wanted to have a little bit of pocket money or they wanted to become economically independent, but because they wanted washing dishes and sweeping homes and putting the children to bed to be recognized as a kind of work that had to be compensated as work. So I think there has to be organizing around the idea of childcare and housework as labor. And I think short of that, and I think other kinds of workers who are also organizing need to recognize and to see mothers and housewives as allies in that struggle. And I think short of that, you can have sort of individual fixes. We can have individual examples of women who manage to have it all, as I talk about in my article, or individual examples of women who are leaning in. But absent some kind of really, I think, radical social change, nothing is going to change, particularly not for poor mothers, migrant mothers, Black mothers in the United States.
Okay, I'm speaking with Merve Emre, author of an essay entitled Mothering Under Capitalism, and we'll be right back. Have you reached some of your goals, but it's not sustainable, or there's more for you, and you're wondering what's next? Wondering how you can make the impact you really want to? Do you need help developing your leadership capacity? If you want more intense support to articulate and accomplish your goals, you may benefit from the Superpower Mentoring Program. I don't often offer this. I actually usually work with large organizations in a larger capacity, but I am opening up a small mentoring group, one-on-one, a small group of women that will work with me directly, and you'll have each other for accountability and support as well. So it's something we're trying at Well Woman Life because we've heard from you that you want more support. You're ready to take that next step. And so we're trying this out. You can go to wellwomanlife.com/workwithgiovanna. And I am going to share with you the framework that I developed based on my both academic and practical background in policy and systems change. And I developed this framework called the Well Woman Lifecycle framework to really help women identify their challenges and where they are in the Well Woman life cycle so that we can then figure out what you need to do next. And depending on where you are in the Well Woman life cycle, there are different things that you should be focusing on. So you might be focused on the wrong thing or at the wrong time. And, those kinds of supports can really launch you into your next level of your best life. So if you're interested in that, we are going to be starting that in May. If you're listening to this in May 2018, go to wellwomanlife.com/workwithgiovanna, Giovanna. And the dates are there. We're going to do monthly webinars with the group and with me presenting. And if you can't make all of the dates, it's okay because we're going to do replay of the webinars. But it also includes one-on-one mentoring with me. So if you have a big goal that you want to reach, or you're in a major transition, or totally burned out in your professional life or your personal life, this work can really, really help you. So I'm excited to hear from you. Go to wellwomanlife.com/work with Giovanna if you think it might be right for you. Okay, let's get on with the show. Okay, I'm back with Merve Emre. We're going to move into the segment called Superpowers for Success. And Merve, I'm going to ask you a few quick round questions here. The first one is, what does success in life mean for you?
Oh my goodness, that's a tricky question. I'm going to deflect it just a little bit by answering, or by telling you when I'm happiest, which I think for me is probably commensurate with some idea of success. I think for me, success is when I'm happiest. Wait, can I get a pass on this question and just come back to it, Giovanna? I promise I will answer it, but I just
yeah.
I need a little bit more time to think about what this means to me.
Yeah, sure thing.
Thank you.
The next question I have, and this sort of relates to you as a woman, as an author, and everything that you are in the world. When did you know you were really good at what you do?
I don't know that I've ever really known that I'm very good at what I do. I don't really think about it in those terms. I think about, I do a couple of different things, right? I'm a writer, and I suppose there are just like external measures of being good at that, which is that people will publish and read your work. I'm a teacher, and there are measures of that too, which is I feel very happy and fulfilled and useful when my students tell me that I'm teaching them things that are valuable, or that I've helped them think differently about a particular kind of problem. I'm an editor, and I feel like I'm doing good when I help a writer move a project from one state of completion to another. So I think for me, knowing that I'm good at something is almost always refracted through the relationships I have with the people who I'm working with or helping. And actually, I think maybe that goes back to your previous question, which I, feel like I stumbled on a little bit. But for me, that the question of what it means to be successful is almost never something I feel or can answer in isolation from the other people that I am working with or struggling with. To solve some kind of shared or collective problem.
Yeah, no, and your answer to the question of when did you know you were really good at what you do, a lot of people give an answer that is, some sort of measure of external validation, and you identified that right away. And what I like to talk to people about is sort of when did they, know internally in their heart or their gut, like, oh, I'm really rocking at this. Like, I got this,
Yeah. I mean, I feel very confident and happy in the work that I do, but, I think I would be lying if I said that the idea of like rocking it is any kind of consistent state that I inhabit.
Right.
Because, like you, I'm sure I'm always stretched in a dozen different directions, and it always feels like something has to give for something else to take off. And so, it never feels like an unqualified statement. Right.
Well, next question is, can you describe a personal habit that contributes to your well-being?
I'm an incredibly, I really believe in routine. And so like one of the things I do with my kids is, I do it with my older son. My younger is just too young for this. But I set timers for everything so that we can avoid temper tantrums. So if I say like, okay, I'm setting a timer for, 3 minutes, you can do this. And then we're going to go do that. You can play trucks for 3 minutes and then we have to go eat dinner. I find that he listens really, really well. And I find that like having that little timer trick really helps me structure monitor my time. It means I can sort of get the kids to bed at the right time so that I can do the work that I need to do once they've gone to sleep. And that is like a really little thing. And probably, I'm sure people listening to this might think it's incredibly anal retentive. But I find it to be a really, really effective tool of like routine and subtle discipline in my house.
Yeah. And boundaries and things. I mean, I think that's a good parenting tool. And I definitely use that. I in fact, if I feel overwhelmed, being pulled in a billion directions, especially with the kids and with work and everything, I say, I'm setting the timer for 15 minutes. I'm going to, have a cup of tea, sit down, decompress, and then I will help you with your homework, or then we can play or whatever. And it creates that space, that the boundary of time, which is so important.
No, I think that's really, really smart. I mean, and I think one of the things that you learn as a parent is that your time just isn't yours anymore, and nobody is going to give you back time. So it's constantly something that you have to be claiming and somewhat selfishly guarding for yourself. So anything that you can do to achieve that, whether it's a timer or leaving the house or whatever it is, I think is valuable.
Yeah. And going back to a point you made earlier about your essay and about mothering, it does seem like you say, we have to claim that time. And there's a lot of guilt with motherhood. Like if I'm not, actually actively taking care of and nurturing my children, then what on earth am I doing? Like, that's just not acceptable. And, intellectually and in reality, we can say, well, of course, that doesn't make any sense. But we internalize all of that guilt and those messages that we receive. And it's a struggle.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think you have to constantly fight that guilt, right? You have to very actively tell yourself, do not feel guilty. You are a person too, and you need to be taken care of as well. And sometimes I think you can feel so consumed by taking care of others that you do forget about your own needs. And I think, I was just thinking about a question that you asked in the previous segment, but, I think we can often, as mothers, also judge other mothers or make other mothers feel guilty or want other mothers to feel guilty in order to prop ourselves up as mothers. So I also think that's a really important thing to constantly be disabusing ourselves of, right? I think everybody just does the best that they can under the circumstances that they're in. And there's no reason for women to sort of act as agents of each other's guilt.
Yeah. And we usually do that. It's a projection, isn't it? It's like, I'm going to criticize you because actually I'm feeling bad about what I'm doing. So there are lots of layers there to peel back. Mm-hmm. Okay. So Merve, sorry. What superpower did you discover you had only to realize it was there all the time?
What superpower did I was raised by a mother who did not place a very high premium on sympathy or empathy. My mother was a working mother. She's a physician. She would sort of leave the house at 7 a.m. and come back at 7 p.m. And if we were ever sick, she would say, take 2 Tylenol and go to school. This is kind of a running joke, this refrain of my mother's. And I think that I thought that when I would be put into positions of caring for other people, my husband, my children, my students, my friends, that I would not be able to activate that kind of empathy, that I would that I was always siding with the kind of rational and the logical over the empathetic, which is a kind of false binary, but whatever. And I think that I have been surprised by my own capacity to engage in relationships with other people that are empathetic and respectful, and that want to see people do well just for the sake of seeing other people do well. That's not something that I had always had ever really thought I was sort of capable of. And I think, it does have something to do with parenting. And I think it also has something to do with teaching, with being a teacher and an educator.
Okay. Very quickly, because we're almost out of time. What advice would you give your younger self, like 10 years ago?
Oh, I think I would have told myself not to be so dismissive of people so quickly. I think I would have told myself not to be so dogmatic in my own ideas. I think I would have told myself to be more forgiving. And I think I would have told myself to also be more secure. I think a lot of our feelings, as we just talked about, a lot of our feelings of judgment or unkindness can come from places of insecurity. And if we're more secure in who we are and what we believe in, it's easier to extend generosity to other people, I think. So, but maybe that is just something that you learn as you get older. And if I had heard this as my younger self, I wouldn't have listened to it.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. That's the real question, right? Is like, what advice would you have given your younger self that you actually would have taken as your younger self?
Yeah, I mean, so many people answer that question so differently. And usually I do follow up with, would she have listened? And everyone's like, no. So it's almost like we have to, we have to have that experience in order to grow and become who we are. So Merve, do you identify as a feminist?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And I kind of guessed that. Very last question. What are you reading right now? What's on your nightstand?
I am actually working on a piece right now on assisted reproductive technologies. So like IVF and egg freezing and embryo freezing. So I have been reading the very fabulous radical feminist Shulamith Firestone's book, The Dialectic of Sex.
Oh.
Yeah, it's absolutely phenomenal. And not nearly read enough today, I don't think. So I highly recommend it.
Okay, we will link to that in the show notes and add that to our reading list.
Perfect.
Yes, Merve, it's been such a pleasure talking to you today.
Yes, you as well. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you. That's it for our show today. Remember, if you need support to live your Well Woman life, head over to wellwomanlife.com/Facebook to join us. Our monthly live event, Well Woman Drinks, brings women together to share our successes and challenges as women, leaders, moms, aunts, sisters, and all the other roles we carry. If you'd like to attend a Well Woman Drinks near you, or if there isn't one in your city yet and you'd like to start one, email info@wellwomanlife.com. If you enjoyed the show, please take a moment and subscribe in iTunes and leave a review. This helps raise visibility, which is super helpful when it comes to producing the show every week. For feedback, comments, or just to let me know you were listening today, find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram @WellWomanLife. I'm Giovanna Rossi for The Well Woman Show. Until next time, have a super powerful week.